or their food or their feasts or anything for himself. Roast beast, yes. He doesn't want that. In this instance, what drives the Grinch is his irritation and his resentment. He hates the Who's joy. He hates their singing. He despises their community. And he believes that if he can just take away the things that bring them joy, all these Christmas things, he can silence that joy. But then comes his crunch moment. He's perched up on Mount Crumpet with all of his sleigh filled with the whole of their Christmas, everything piled high, and he's ready to dump it. And then he pauses, and he can't believe what he hears. Singing. The Who's rejoice anyway. They gather together, they hold hands, they raise their voices in love, even without presents or feasts. And it's that sound in that moment that cracks him open. It exposes instantly not only his bitterness and his small heart, but it shows us his isolation, his separation from community. In that moment of vulnerability, the Grinch realizes that joy and belonging cannot be stolen. And so, without intending it, his heart grows, they say. And he turns and he brings the gifts back to them, and he finds joy inside of the community that he once tried to deprive of it. Now, like the Grinch, the manager in the parable also hits a crunch zone. He's caught and he's threatened with being fired and exposed. And in his moment of vulnerability and fear, yes, his heart softens just a little. And he does something good, although he's doing things for himself and he doesn't realize the good he's going to do for others. His motives are mixed, but what results out of his actions is that relationships with his neighbors are mended, burdens that they carry are eased, and their community is restored. Both the Grinch and the manager discover that what matters most in this world is not our possessions, not our wealth, not our things. It is relationship. It is trust, it's belonging, and it is community. Now, I think, and maybe you think so too, what's most surprising about this parable isn't the manager or what he did. It's how the rich man responds. Surely, he had every right to punish the manager severely. But instead, he commends him for his resourcefulness, his shrewdness. What we hear is not praise for his dishonesty at all, but recognition that the manager has taken a first step in a right direction. That maybe, perhaps for the first time in his life, the manager has used his position in a way that would bring relief to others instead of just serving himself. Yeah, the good he did is tangled up in fear. It's all about self-interest. But it opened the door to their and his restoration. Because it's in this moment that that rich man decides to do a little squandering himself. He decides to squander forgiveness. To squander it by pouring it out graciously and generously upon one who might not have ever believed or imagined that he deserved it. He decided to choose to commend the good done and to stand in the hope of a heart that might have been forever changed. Now, Jesus calls you and I to consider our own motivations, what we do, but why we do it, the things we say, but why those things get said. He calls us to consider our own motives so that we may avoid doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. If we resist this call, then he suggests that maybe we ought to just have a change of heart. Maybe we should trust in God and God's provision for us so that we can act with integrity, we can seek good with good intention, and we can align ourselves with God's ways of generosity and mercy and love. He makes it clear that ultimately, God calls us to follow one path and only one path. And that is the path of love. To embrace our love of God, to love our neighbors, rather than trying to serve and save ourselves through our love of worldly things. And just like the rich man in our parable, God is at the ready to squander forgiveness upon us and to give each and every one of us a second chance. And again and again. Chances that are extravagant, especially to those who don't feel that we deserve it. Now, I know, and you know, that there is a great deal of pressure in our world to accumulate things, right? We have a problem of clutter. But we accumulate money, we accumulate possessions, we accumulate status, access. We somehow convince ourselves that having more will solve our problems and prove to others that we are worthy. But my friends, I can't imagine anything so tragic as someone sitting alone in their grand home, gazing out upon their property and all their wealth, absent of the love of God and the companionship of others. Wealth can't comfort us in our grief. At the end of our lives, we can't take it with us. And here, perhaps, is a reminder from Jesus to us all. We are reminded that we are stewards. We are not owners. Everything that we call ours is but temporary. Our houses will one day be lived in by somebody else. Our cars may be driven by another driver after us. All those assets that we build up and pass on may go to heirs or to strangers, or maybe to causes we most care about. But in the end, it's really like all monopoly money. You know, it's fleeting and we can't hold on to it. It's temporary. So how can we dispel the illusion of wealth, the illusion that having it is more important than having God and the love of God? Jesus says we're to use what we have to serve God, and that is a real lesson. All that we have, none of it is truly ours, and it's entrusted to us for a season. And so we need to ask, what shall we do with it now? Because that matters today. He's told us in Matthew that where your heart is, there also is your treasure. And St. Paul tells us that love never ends. You see, for Jesus, the only true riches are the ones that last. And the only thing that lasts is God's love and our love of neighbor. And so we're to give as he gave, and we're to forgive as he forgave. Now soon, in just a couple of weeks, on October 5th, we will commence our stewardship season here at St. Dunstan's. And this is a time every year when we pause to take a note and to remember all that has been entrusted into our hands by God, and then to prayerfully discern with God how best to share what we have in support of God's mission and God's love. I want you to know that as you entrust your treasure to your church, your vestry and I promise to steward your gifts with integrity and with grace, and always asking, how are we by God called to serve, to love our neighbor, to nurture our church, and how are we to steward the gifts we have been given? Now, the truth be told, money is a gift from God. And it is a tool that God gives us to do ministry together here and now, as well as to save and build to sustain ourselves in the future, And as a community, we always are called to keep our hearts and our minds open to the new ways in which God is calling us to love our neighbors. When Jesus says you can't serve two masters, he reminds us that we cannot cling too tightly to what we have. We have to be willing to open our hands and our hearts and to share in ways that reveal God's love in the world. That is for the church, and that is for each of us. So I hope, my friends, that what you heard in today's parable was not an appeasement or a sanctioning of dishonesty or wicked craftiness and tricking. I hope that you've heard something higher and something deeper. Jesus calls us to align our hearts and our actions, to make them in sync. He calls us to go forward and trust in God without fear and with intention to love. He asks us to love God with all that we are and to love our neighbor the way that we love ourselves. And the good news is that when we get it wrong, when we have been dishonest, in those moments that we are self-serving or self-righteous, in the moments when our motives are mixed or we lose our way, God does not give up on us. Like the rich man in the story, he sees in us the potential to turn everything, even our flawed choices, toward blessing. God forgives and always invites us to try again. To love God and to love our neighbor is the truest riches and is the soundest investment we can make. Because everything else in its time will pass away, but love will never, ever